Welcome back. This time we're talking about Ben-Hur, the remake of the 1959 classic film starring Charlton Heston. Now I'm sure if you ask the filmmakers, they would say that this is not a remake, just another adaptation of the novel that the original movie was based on as well. But let's face it, this is a remake, and frankly just the latest in a long line of remakes that we seem to get every year. And I could complain every time a new remake comes out and, acknowledge the rare occasions when the new version is actually an improvement, like Pete's Dragon last weekend. But even if I were to just give up on my complaints on this, I have to say there are some films that you have to go, no, let's just leave them alone. And I think one of the only 3 films in history to earn 11 Academy Awards would be on that list. But my complaints about this new film's existence aside, I still need to go into this movie and see if it's any good. And I have to say, it's not the train wreck I was honestly expecting. But it's still a very generic historical action movie with some major pacing problems, along with some really wonky camera work that really just bring everything down, even when the movie's actually working. There are a few sequences in this movie, I will say, that were actually pretty good. And then between the pacing and the camera work, it comes right back down to earth very quickly. Now, as far as the story goes, if you're not familiar with the original movie, our hero is Judah Ben-Hur, a Jewish prince living in Judea, played in this version by Jack Huston. His adopted brother is Masala, played by Toby Kebbell, and he is the son of a disgraced Roman officer. And these two grow up as brothers, and they're best friends until one day Masala's drive to stake out his own path leads him to join the Roman army and disappears for a number of years. He returns home to find it besieged by these Jewish dissidents who are trying to overthrow the Roman rule, which puts him at odds with his Jewish adopted family. And again, if you're not familiar with the original story, I don't want to spoil it, but suffice it to say, things happen, people get blamed for things whether or not they were actually at fault or not, and Ben-Hur ends up in slavery, and ultimately makes his own return seeking revenge against Masala. Now, the original Ben-Hur was a very long movie. I actually was hoping to try to watch it in the lead up to the remake, forgetting that it's nearly 4 hours long, and I just did not have time to sit down to watch a 4-hour movie. But I bring that up because this new one is 2 hours long and tries to tell the same story, resulting in a lot of the pacing problems that I mentioned earlier. The first act is pretty well paced, but the pacing consistently gets worse and worse as we get closer to the end of this movie. I liken it to a cake decorator that's trying to write happy birthday on a cake. And as they get to about the B of birthday, they realize they're not going to have enough room, so they start making the letters skinnier and skinnier and skinnier until you can pretty much barely read the Y. That's this movie. And essentially we're left with a film that rushes through the emotional payoff of the entire story. I went into this movie trying to give it the benefit of the doubt, ignoring that it's a remake of a classic film, and seeing if it could hold up, if not on that standard, the standard of an enjoyable movie at least. And I will say, its problems aside, story-wise and definitely with the cinematography, it was an alright movie. Then as we get into the final act, and especially the last 20 minutes, things are so rushed. There's so many story beats they've still got to hit before we get to the credits that the emotional payoff, the resolution of these conflicts that have driven this story happens so fast they're in no way believable. It's basically characters are doing things and things are happening because that's what the story says happened, not because there's any believability at all to it. And it basically just cuts this film off at the knees right before the finish line. To use another sports analogy, since we're still in the middle of the Olympics, it's like watching a decent balance beam performance. Not great, not spectacular, but alright. And then they go for the landing and they just fall flat on their face. I mean, that's essentially what this movie does. And it goes from a movie that was passably generic to pretty much pass. Now, story and pacing issues aside, the other big complaint I have with this movie is the cinematography. Now, I'm one that if I see beautiful cinematography, I will mention it in my reviews. This is one of the few times where I will go that the cinematography was just plain bad. Now, I should mention that this film is directed by Timur Bekmambetov, who gave us Wanted as well as Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. And for this film, he brings in cinematographer Oliver Wood, who has worked on some films I really enjoyed, especially the Bourne trilogy, where his use of handheld cameras brought an almost documentary style to this modern action franchise and brought a lot of immediacy to the action. He uses a very similar handheld style here, but in the context of a historical action drama, it just doesn't mesh. It just doesn't work. There's so many dialogue scenes where the camera's always got to be moving because it's handheld, and it's just so out of place with this style of movie. And then there's the opening scene, which has some of the worst camera work and editing I've seen in a major release in a long time. It basically introduces us to Ben-Hur and Masala as they're racing these horses in this field, setting up the big chariot race that we get in the third act. And there's so many different shots in this sequence. It was bad. We have handheld shots. We have handheld panning shots that start off static and then quickly pan over. We have POV shots of them riding the horses. We have POV shots of like between the horses' legs as they're running. We have reverse POV shots when we're looking right in their faces as they're riding their horses. We have panning shots. We have overhead shots, and it's all mixed together and cut. And like these panning shots, it'll start out static, and then like you would think it would be like this sweeping shot, but it'll go like this, and it'll cut to like right here, and then cut. We're right to the next shot. It was horrible, and I will say that was not indicative of the entire movie. But I had to mention it because it was terrible. And I'll end on this: if you're going to remake a classic film like Ben-Hur, and I know it's 57 years old now, if you're gonna do it, there's two ways to go about it. You can either try to recapture that epic prestige film quality that honestly we don't get anymore and just reach for the stars, or you can make a generic action movie. And it's obvious they went for option B and didn't even really succeed that well at that. So Ben-Hur, as a remake, it's an utter failure. It in no way even tries to be as good as the original. And as a generic historical action film, the story pacing, the lack of emotional payoff at the end, and poor camera work keep it from even being successful at that. There's a lot of good movies out there right now. There's better things to go watch. So if you've seen the new Ben-Hur, let me know what you thought. If you've seen the old one, what do you think of that one? Is it indeed that classic that we all say it is? As always, you can subscribe to my channel, check out some of my reviews, and until next time, I'll see you at the movies.